There's a moment in racing that I've always found strange. You're approaching a corner, another car is alongside you, and before you've really had time to think about what you're going to do, you've already done it. You've covered the inside, you've lifted slightly earlier, you've committed to the outside line. If somebody stopped you immediately afterwards and asked why you made that decision, sometimes the only honest answer would be, I don't know, it just felt right. But that decision wasn't random. Your brain made that decision way before you were consciously aware of it. And understanding why that happens might completely change the way you think about becoming a faster driver. Before we get into it, I want you to think about your own driving. Have you ever reacted to something on track almost automatically, then only realised afterwards what you'd actually done? Let me know in the comments, because I think almost every experienced driver has had that moment. Welcome to Sabotage, the psychology of racing, and back when I was racing, this was something I became fascinated by. There were decisions I could explain perfectly, where I wanted to brake, what line I wanted to take, but then there were other decisions that seemed to happen almost underneath conscious thought. You'd sense that somebody was going to attack before they actually moved. You'd change your line because something about the corner didn't feel right. You'd back out of an opportunity without being able to immediately explain what you'd noticed. At first, it's easy to describe that instinct. But instinct doesn't really explain anything, because what looks like instinct is often your brain recognizing patterns faster than your conscious mind can describe them. And that distinction matters, because fast drivers aren't necessarily consciously processing more information. Very often, they're processing less. Their brain has simply learned which information matters. Think about what happens when you're new to a circuit. Everything requires attention. Where's the braking marker? What gear am I in? And where's the apex? You can almost hear the internal conversation happening. And because you're consciously managing so many individual tasks, your mental bandwidth disappears incredibly quickly. But drive that same corner hundreds of times and something changes. You stop consciously thinking about the gear change. You stop telling yourself where to turn. Your hands make corrections before you consciously register the movement. The workload hasn't disappeared, it's been transferred. Your brain has started turning individual actions into patterns. And that's the first major reason you make racing decisions before you realise it. Experience compresses information. A beginner might see 10 separate pieces of information approaching a corner. An experienced driver might see one situation. That's a huge difference. Now imagine you're following another car into a braking zone. A less experienced driver might consciously notice the braking lines, the distance between the cars, the corner approaching. An experienced driver may look at exactly the same scene and immediately feel, not happening. But why? Maybe the car ahead positioned itself half a meter differently. Or individually, those details might never reach conscious awareness. Together, they form a pattern the brain already recognizes. And suddenly, the decision appears, don't attack. You experience the conclusion, not necessarily every calculation that produced it, but there's a problem. Your subconscious decision making isn't automatically correct, and this is where things become much more interesting. Your brain is constantly trying to predict what's going to happen next. That's incredibly useful in racing, because reacting to only one thing after something happens is often too slow. If the rear starts rotating and you wait until you've consciously identified oversteer before correcting it, you're already behind the car. Instead, experienced drivers become sensitive to the signals that normally appear before the bigger event. Your brain starts predicting what comes next, so the correction begins almost before the problem fully exists. That's what can make a great driver look almost unnaturally smooth. They're not necessarily reacting faster to the slide, they're recognizing the conditions that produced the slide earlier, and the same thing happens in wheel-to-wheel racing. You don't always react to another driver's move. Sometimes you react to the conditions that suggest they're about to make it, how they've behaved over the previous few corners. Your brain is constantly building predictions. But those predictions can also be wrong. And when they're wrong, they can become incredibly difficult to detect because they don't always feel like decisions. Imagine you've had a big accident at a particular corner. Next time you arrive there, you brake 5 meters earlier. You probably don't consciously think, that accident has changed my perception of risk, therefore I'm deliberately braking earlier. You just brake, and it feels normal. Or imagine another driver has repeatedly attacked you from a long way back. Eventually, you start defending before there's actually a credible threat. Again, it doesn't necessarily feel like fear. It feels like, this is what I need to do. That's where subconscious decision making becomes both one of the driver's greatest strengths and one of their biggest weaknesses. One technique I think is especially useful is reviewing a race and pausing before an important moment. Then ask yourself, what information was available to me right here? Not afterwards, not once you know the outcome, right there. Because once you know what happened, your brain is extremely good at inventing a clean explanation for why it happened. But racing doesn't happen with hindsight, it happens in uncertainty. And that's what makes the exercise so useful. The difference between two drivers isn't always that one knows more. Sometimes one driver's brain has simply learned to recognize the right pattern earlier. They see the same track, the same opponent, or the same corner, but the information means something different to them. And once that pattern recognition becomes automatic, the decision seems to appear from nowhere. That's what we often call instinct. But instinct is often just experience, operating faster than language. And that leads to a much bigger question. If experienced drivers are recognizing patterns that newer drivers don't consciously notice, what are they actually seeing? Because the fascinating part isn't that just fast drivers make decisions earlier, it's that they may genuinely perceive the same corner differently. Click the video on screen now if you want to get out of your plateau.